In a clay tablet written 4,000 years ago, a Sumerian merchant named Nasir is being yelled at. The customer who wrote the tablet is furious. He had paid in advance for a shipment of high-grade copper from the foreign port of Dilmun. Nasir delivered low-grade copper instead. The customer demands his money back. He threatens to take his future business elsewhere. He insults Nasir's character. He invokes the gods. The complaint runs the entire length of the tablet, in dense, angry cuneiform. This tablet exists. You can see it today in the British Museum. It is the oldest customer complaint letter in human history, and it is unmistakably a document from a fully functioning capitalist economy. There is a buyer, there is a seller, there is a contract, there is a quality dispute, there are competing suppliers, there is, underneath all of it, a system of money, of credit, of international trade, and of legal recourse. A system so sophisticated that the language of the complaint, when translated, sounds startlingly modern. The Sumerians, 4,000 years ago, were not running a primitive barter economy. They were running an economy that had already invented almost every financial instrument we still use today: money, loans, interest rates, promissory notes, compound interest, international trade finance, banking, debt forgiveness. Modern economists, when they read the Sumerian financial records carefully, often have the same uncomfortable reaction, because what these tablets describe is not the dim ancestor of modern finance. What they describe is, recognizably, modern finance itself, invented in the marshes of southern Iraq, refined across 1,000 years, and inherited by every civilization that came after. You are in the Sumerian vault. The clay tablets are speaking. And tonight, what they are describing is the financial system you are still living inside. To understand what the Sumerians did, you have to understand what they were working with. Southern Mesopotamia was an unlikely place to invent the world economy. The land was flat, hot, and almost entirely without natural resources. There was no metal in the ground, no stone, no timber, no precious gems. What Sumer had was grain, specifically barley, vast surplus quantities of barley. The combination of irrigation engineering and the right soil produced harvests that exceeded what the local population could possibly eat. And this surplus, this overflow of edible value sitting in temple granaries, became the foundation of everything that followed. A society that has more food than it needs is a society that can pay people to do things other than farming. It can pay them to build temples, to weave cloth, to write things down, and that last invention, writing, was itself an economic invention. The earliest cuneiform tablets we have, dating to around 3500 BC, are not poetry, not religion. They are receipts, inventory lists, records of who owes what to whom. Cuneiform was not invented to describe the gods. It was invented to track grain. From the very first tablet, writing was a financial technology. By the 3rd millennium BC, that economy had developed two parallel systems of money. The first was barley. The standard unit was the sila, roughly 1 liter. A laborer's daily ration was typically 2 sila. Barley was used to pay wages, to pay rent, to buy small everyday goods, the working currency of ordinary life. The second was silver. The standard unit was the shekel, approximately 8.3 grams of refined silver. 60 shekels made 1 mina, and here is where the system became unusual. The Sumerians did not have coins. Coined money was not invented for another 1,500 years. What the Sumerians had was weighed silver, lumps, rings, cut pieces. Whatever shape was convenient, weighed precisely on a scale at the moment of transaction. This is not primitive. This is, in some ways, more sophisticated than coinage. Because weighed silver cannot be debased, there is no king's face on it. The value is inherent in the metal, verified by a scale. The Sumerians were operating, in modern terms, on a hard money standard, so hard It would not be matched again until the gold-backed currencies of the 19th century AD, and they used both systems at once. A worker might be paid in barley for daily expenses, but receive a year-end bonus in silver. A merchant might buy goods locally with grain and pay for international shipments with silver. This is bimonetarism. Two currencies operating in parallel, each used for the transactions it suited best. It is a system that economists today still study because it solves problems that single currency systems cannot. Where did the silver come from? It did not come from Sumer. Every gram of silver that circulated through the Sumerian economy had been imported from somewhere far away. Anatolia, in modern Turkey, was the largest single source. Dilmun, the island of Bahrain, was a major distribution hub. Arata, somewhere on the Iranian plateau, Marhashi, Meluha, which most scholars identify with the Indus Valley civilization in modern Pakistan. To get silver from any of these regions to the marketplaces of Ur or Lagash required moving it across hundreds, sometimes thousands of kilometers, by donkey caravan, by riverboat, by seagoing vessel, through territories that were politically unstable, often hostile. The logistical achievement of maintaining a stable silver supply across this network, century after century, is staggering. And it was sustained not by a centralized empire, but by a self-organizing class of professional merchants. These merchants had a name. The Sumerian word was Damgar. The Akkadian word was Tamkaram. They were a recognized profession with their own legal status, their own contractual conventions, and their own characteristic risks. They operated with a portfolio of credit relationships, money owed to them by suppliers, money they owed to investors, money in transit on caravans not yet returned. They were, in every meaningful sense, the world's first international bankers. A single Damgar tablet from around 2400 BC survives in the Yale Babylonian collection. It records the activities of a merchant named Diutu. He took 10 minas of refined silver and 300 minas of wool from the city of Lagash. He traveled to Dilmun. He returned with 1,350 minas of copper, 27.5 minas of tin. The goods were handed over to Baranamtara, the wife of the ruler of Lagash. She brought them to the storehouse, where the overseer Enigal made a balanced account. Stop and consider what this single tablet reveals. A merchant, operating with capital provided partly by the temple and partly by the ruler's household, traveled approximately 800 kilometers. He traded outbound goods for inbound goods at known exchange rates. He returned. He delivered the proceeds. The transaction was audited. It was archived. This is functional, sophisticated, multi-stage international trade, with investment capital, currency exchange, transportation logistics, audit and balanced accounting in 2400 BC. And tin and copper were not the only goods moving through these networks. Lapis lazuli came from a single source, the mines in the mountains of what is now Afghanistan, 3,000 kilometers away. Carnelian beads came from the Indus Valley. Cedar timber came from Lebanon. Obsidian came from Anatolia. Diorite came from Oman. Ivory came from Africa. Resin found in the tomb of Queen Puabi at Ur has been chemically traced to Mozambique. The Sumerians were sourcing materials 4,000 years ago from a network that spanned from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean to Central Asia. This was a global economy, smaller in scale than today's, but architecturally similar, a web of specialized producers connected by specialized merchants, settling accounts in a common monetary medium. Underneath this trading economy was the technology that made it sustainable. The Sumerians invented credit. This is perhaps their most important and least appreciated economic contribution. Because lending at interest does not appear in the archaeological record anywhere else in the early Bronze Age world, there is no evidence of similar lending practices in early Egypt, in early China, or in the Indus Valley. The institution arose in southern Mesopotamia, and from there it spread to every culture the Sumerians traded with. The standard interest rate, set by long-established custom and later codified in law, was 20% per year on loans of silver. 20%, the same approximate rate that defines modern credit cards. The Sumerians did not pick this number arbitrarily. The mathematics behind it reveals something elegant about how their economy worked. The Sumerian numerical system was sexagesimal, base 60. This is why we still divide hours into 60 minutes, minutes into 60 seconds, and circles into 360 degrees. And in their financial mathematics, the simplest possible interest rate was 1 shekel per mina per month, 1/60th, the smallest unit fraction in their counting system. Multiplied by 12 months a year, this comes out to 12 shekels per mina annually, exactly 20%. The interest rate was set, in other words, not by economic theory, but by the geometry of the number system itself. It was the easiest possible rate to calculate. The system spread because it was simple, and it remained at 20% for nearly 2,000 years because no one ever found a good reason to change something that worked. For loans of barley, the rate was different, 33.33% per year, higher because grain was riskier. Grain could rot, could be eaten by pests, could fail entirely if the harvest was poor. A risk-adjusted interest rate set higher for less reliable collateral, calibrated by centuries of practical experience, long before any economist thought to formalize the principle. Where did the loans come from? Two main sources, the temples and the merchants themselves. The temples were the original banks of human civilization. In every major Sumerian city, the central temple complex held vast accumulated wealth, in silver, in grain, in livestock, in stored goods. This wealth came from offerings, from agricultural production on temple-owned lands, and from the long-distance trade the temples financed. A clay tablet that records a deposit in the temple of Nana at Ur is structurally a bank deposit slip. The depositor's name is recorded, the amount is recorded, the witnesses are recorded. The seal of the priest who received the deposit is impressed on the tablet. When the depositor returned to retrieve their goods, a new tablet was created recording the withdrawal. The temple kept its records, the depositor kept theirs. These deposits were not idle. The temples loaned them out to merchants funding caravans, to farmers needing seed grain before planting season, to craftsmen needing capital for raw materials. The temple charged interest. The temple earned a margin between what it paid depositors, usually nothing, and what it charged borrowers. This is, by every functional measure, fractional reserve banking. The temple did not keep all deposited goods immediately on hand at all times. It kept enough to satisfy normal withdrawal demand and lent the rest at interest. When the system worked, it generated steady wealth for the institution. When it failed, and there are records of temple bankruptcies, of priests fleeing their cities, of depositors finding their goods unrecoverable, it failed in ways that would be familiar to any modern bank examiner. The temples were not the only lenders. Wealthy merchants, the damgars, also extended credit. Some of them became spectacularly wealthy. The records of one merchant from Ur show personal capital reserves of over 100 minas of silver, approximately 50 kilograms. By the standards of the period, this represented the working capital of a small kingdom. He owned land, he owned slaves, he owned shares in trading expeditions. He held promissory notes from dozens of borrowers across multiple cities. He was, in modern terms, a multimillionaire, and his existence was made possible entirely by the financial instruments his civilization had invented. This brings us to the dark side, because where there is lending at interest, there is debt, and where there is debt that cannot be repaid. The Sumerian economy had a structural problem that every credit-based economy in history has eventually faced. The mathematics of compound interest grow faster than the productive capacity of any economy can sustain. A loan at 20% annual interest, compounded, doubles in less than 4 years, quadruples in less than 8. A peasant farmer who borrowed a small sum of silver to feed his family through a bad season, could find, within a generation, that his debt exceeded the value of his farm, his livestock, and the labor of every member of his household combined. What happened next resembles modern debt enforcement. The lender could seize the collateral. If the loan had been secured against the farm became the lender's. If it had been secured against the borrower's labor, the borrower entered debt servitude, working off the obligation often for years, sometimes for life. If it had been secured against the borrower's family, the family entered debt servitude. Sumerian tablets record specific cases. A farmer's wife sold to a merchant for a debt of silver. A man's children placed in service to a temple to discharge a delinquent obligation, a man himself becoming the bondservant of his own creditor. This was debt slavery, the legally formalized end state of an economic system in which compound interest had outrun the borrower's ability to pay. And it was so common, so socially destabilizing, that the Sumerian state developed a specific institution to manage it. The institution was called a magi. The word translates roughly as freedom, but more literally as a return to the mother, a restoration of original conditions. A periodic, declared cancellation of debts. Sumerian kings periodically issued decrees that cancelled all personal agricultural debts in the kingdom. Land that had been seized for unpaid loans was returned to its original owners. Family members held in debt servitude were freed and returned to their households. The debt slate, in the most literal sense, was wiped clean. The clay tablets recording the loans were physically broken. This was not generosity, it was systemic maintenance. The Sumerian kings understood explicitly, and centuries before any modern economist would write it down, that an economy with compound interest cannot function indefinitely without periodic resets. If too much wealth concentrates in too few hands, if too many ordinary people are reduced to debt servitude, the agricultural base of the economy collapses. Fields go untended. Tax revenue drops. Social order erodes because desperate people, having nothing left to lose, become dangerous. The amagi was the safety valve. It cancelled specifically agricultural and personal debts, the loans that had pulled ordinary people into bondage. It generally left commercial debts in place. The state distinguished between productive credit and predatory credit, and it cancelled only the second kind. This institution, like nearly everything else the Sumerians invented, did not die when their civilization died. It was inherited. The Babylonians continued the practice under the name Anduraram. The Israelites adopted a version of it as the Jubilee year, written into the book of Leviticus. The Greeks knew of it. The Romans practiced their own versions of it. The institution of declared periodic debt cancellation followed the Sumerians' financial inventions through every civilization that adopted them. The Sumerian economy was, ultimately, the prototype for everything that came after: money, banks, loans, interest, international trade, foreign exchange, debt slavery, debt forgiveness. The Sumerians did not invent each of these things in isolation. They invented them together, as a system, because they were the first people on Earth to live inside a society complex enough to need them all simultaneously. What is most disquieting about the Sumerian financial record is not how primitive it was. It is how recognizable it is. The merchant complaining about defective copper, the temple priest auditing a deposit ledger, the farmer signing a promissory note in barley because his harvest will pay it back. The merchant family with capital reserves spread across half a dozen ongoing investments, the desperate borrower whose family is about to enter servitude, the king who declares a margi to diffuse the social crisis his predecessors allowed to build up. These are not characters from a vanished world. These are characters from our world, transported 4,000 years backward, dressed in linen and worshipping different gods, but recognizable to anyone who has ever taken out a loan, paid back a creditor, or watched a small business fail because it could not service its debts. The financial system you live inside was not invented in 19th century London. It was not invented in 17th century Amsterdam. It was not invented in medieval Italy. It was invented in the temple complexes and merchant houses of southern Iraq 4,000 years ago. We have not added anything fundamental to the Sumerian financial toolkit. We have made it faster, we have made it global, we have made it digital. But the core instruments, the loan, the interest rate, the deposit, the contract, the audit, the international trade settlement, the periodic crisis, the periodic relief, all of these were already in place when the priests of Ur balanced their first ledgers under the light of oil lamps. When the city of Ur fell in 2004 BC, the political empire ended. The merchant houses mostly did not. The trade networks mostly did not. The financial instruments mostly did not. The Sumerian economic system was inherited by the Babylonians, by the Assyrians, by the Persians, by the Greeks, by the Romans, who built the legal infrastructure that would govern Western finance for the next 2,000 years. The Damgars of Lagash and Ur are the direct ancestors of the bankers of Florence, of London, of Wall Street. Not metaphorically, literally, a continuous transmission of financial knowledge, instrument by instrument, from cuneiform tablet to medieval ledger to modern spreadsheet. We are the heirs, whether we like it or not, of a system invented in a place that no longer exists, by a people whose language no one has spoken in 4,000 years. And in the basements of museums from Chicago to Berlin, there are still tens of thousands of Sumerian financial documents that no one has translated. Loan contracts, trade receipts, audit reports, customer complaints. The dense daily paperwork of an economy that built the operating system of every economy that came after. The Sumerians wrote it down. We are still living inside it. And the tablets that recorded the first chapters, the chapters that explain not just what the system does, but why it works and why it sometimes fails, most of those tablets are still sealed, still waiting, still holding the answers that the civilization that wrote them already knew, that the civilization that inherited them has been slowly forgetting, and that the civilization that exists today might want to remember before the next time the system reaches one of its periodic crises and someone has to decide whether or not to declare a new Amagi. The vault is open. The tablets are speaking. The only question is whether the inheritors of the Sumerian economy are finally ready to listen to the people who built it. If this video opened a door for you, subscribe to the Sumerian Vault and turn on notifications. The next ledger is already being translated. The clay remembers what we forget. The vault remains open.